All right, let's get going. Welcome to Counter-Apologetics Workshop. This is series number 3. I'm Eric Ozols. I prepared this for Inland Empire, Atheists, Agnostics, and Freethinkers around Redlands. Thanks for coming. Big picture today. I hope you caught up on the first couple episodes. If you didn't, you're going to be okay. There's a couple of major points I'm going to go through again and highlight those if you didn't, but you can get this as a standalone if you need it. Big picture-wise today, overview. I'm going to give you a little bit of my take on some of their philosophical goals. And when I say they, I'm pointing a finger and saying apologetics, religious apologetics, okay? What are they up to? If you can kind of get into their heads a little bit, you'll understand where they're coming from. It'll help you formulate responses a little better. Artie, please.
What do you mean by religious apologetics? What exactly, how would you define that?
This was a little bit in the first session. Apologetics is comes from the Greek word apologia, or Latin word apologia. It means to give a defense for, okay? Sounds like apology, but it means I'm going to give a defense for.
Oh.
The history of it behind it was they used to have the court sessions where somebody would be accused, and then a defense attorney would come in and provide a defense for you. He was an apologist. Okay, does that make sense? So there was, I can't remember what the other side of that was, but there was the prosecution side and the defense side. So this is kind of preparing people's minds for getting into these conversations, expecting some of the things we're going to hear, and some of the more successful ways I've dealt with these in the past. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so some of the arguments, classical arguments, we're going to focus on specifically just for sake of time, if nothing else. And that's, I want to, as an aside, the most difficult part of this can be figuring out which specific argument you're dealing with in the first place before you can formulate a response, because each one of them has a very, very defined set of mistakes, failures, and fallacious reasoning involved. And as soon as you figure out which one you're dealing with, that's the biggest problem you can help yourself out by figuring out in the first place. And I'm going to give you a little bit of what I've focused on in the past and what I think is a good idea to focus on in the future, okay? All right. Every time I give us goals, I give us some objectives, I think it's a good idea to start out. Why are we here? Why are we doing this? It's my intent that when we walk out of here, I would hope you guys have some insight on some apologetic intent. What are they up to, okay? Familiarity with some of the classical categories of arguments, working in knowledge on how they fail, okay? And then some serviceable responses so we can work together, kind of bounce some ideas off each other about how to come up with and formulate some of these responses, ways that have been successful in the past, okay? So this is a little more meta, all right, about getting into my philosophy of what I think their philosophy is, okay? And there's a little bit of a discussion going on between some people that engage in this very frequently about the percentage of them that are dealing with this from a genuine perspective and dealing with this from a disingenuous perspective. Phil and I have gone into this in detail a little bit, and there's still more discussion to be had. We differ a little bit on the percentage-wise. It's a little bit of a silly argument in terms of what percentage is genuine, what percentage is disingenuous, but it matters. And I bring this up because if you're dealing with somebody who's disingenuous and you're just casually having this conversation, you're coming at this from an honest perspective. But if you're dealing with somebody who's doing this in a disingenuous sense, they're not coming at this from an honest perspective. So you may be spinning your wheels, and it's your call if you just enjoy the verbal sparring, the back and forth, just to kind of the intellectual intercourse, if you will. If you're into that, please, by all means, engage in it. But if you're not, and you figured out that you're dealing with somebody who's doing this in a disingenuous sense, it's your choice to cut and run. I enjoy doing it, but I don't begrudge anybody for cutting and running. And I think the easiest way to ascertain in a very short order whether or not you're dealing with somebody who's genuine or disingenuous is if you've pointed out an error or a mistake that's been made in a reasoning argument, some point that's been brought up, and they acknowledge it. That's the key. If they acknowledge that their point is fallacious, that they've made an error in their reasoning, they are agreeing with you, yes, this is an error in my reasoning, but they continue to bring that same point up again. If they're continuing to go back to that's their safe place, that's their hermit shell crowd, okay? If you're dealing with somebody that keeps doing that, you've got yourself something that's disingenuous. There are, to be fair, many people are genuine. They actually think these things are accurate ideas, they bring them to you, they're doing it because they want to save your eternal soul, they want to convert you, they want to recruit you, whatever the case may be. They're doing it from a genuine perspective, but if you're dealing with something that's not genuine, you may be spinning your wheels, banging your head against the wall. Part of what's being brought up is a lot of psychological issues. A lot of the questions that are asked are not meant to convince you on the surface level of the question that you're hearing. They're actually playing on some very primal urges and sensations that we have. Okay, just because of the nature of who we are, we're human beings. We're soft tissue between your ears, right? When they ask you some of these questions, and just for example, What happened before the Big Bang? Where do we go after we die? One we hear all the time recently in the social circle is, where does the information in DNA come from? That sort of stuff. They're asking you these questions where, not because they're expecting you to answer, oh, it comes from Montana, oh, it comes from Denny's. They're not expecting that. They're expecting you to say, I don't know, right? That's a very powerful statement. They know the answers I don't know, because everybody says I don't know. The smartest people in the world say I don't know. So if the smartest people in the world say I don't know, you're going to say I don't know. They're expecting and anticipating and hoping you say I don't know. Why? Because this puts us into a state of I don't know, and I was just exposed in public of not knowing something, right? It kind of puts you back on your heels a little bit, because we value our competency. We value being seen as competent in front of our peers, right? I'm standing in front of you guys. I want you to think of me as competent. If something I've done wrong is exposed, oh my gosh, I feel apologetic. I need to make not apologetics, but I feel like I need to make an apology. I'm sorry, I'm going to do that. I'm going to improve in the future. I won't make that same mistake again. I'm being genuine, right? We value our competency, but if you can expose somebody's gap in knowledge, you have found a way to expose their competency, to threaten their competency, and another element of that is consistency. We want to be thought of as consistent, right? You think about all the political discussions we've made, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and I won't defund Medicare, whatever the case may be. A few months later, you're doing exactly what you said you weren't going to do, or whatever you said was the case is not the case, right? Now your consistency is threatened, which is another element of your competency. So they're trying to find a way to crack and to put you back on your heels and to kind of rattle your cage a little bit, because now you're primed for whatever they're going to give you next. We love primacy. We value primacy. Real quick.
Yes. Pardon me, guys.
You're okay. We have a preference for primacy. If we don't know something and we're feeling a little jolted, and somebody offers something to us, the first thing that's offered, we're going to reach out for. If you think about being shoved back and somebody reaches out for you, you're going to grab the first thing that's sent out your way. We have a preference for primacy. Whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, we reach for the first thing that's primacy.
I'd like to explain that. What do you mean primacy? And I'm not.
Primacy, the first excuse that's offered. So I ask you, where are we going after we die? And you say, gosh, I don't know. Now I've exposed your weakness, right? I don't know something.
I just say
so
I don't give a shit. So what difference does it make?
Fair, but they're going to offer up. You say you don't give a shit, but somebody else may just say I don't know, and now they're back on the heels. I'm talking a little bit of meta, how they approach this, their philosophy.
Obviously,
yeah, you follow me? So
they have answers for everything.
Bingo. And then they want to offer something up, and we have a preference for the first thing that's offered. And by that I mean there's a preference for primacy. Right, wrong, or different. Your brain is pattern seeking. You will add patterns that are not there just because your brain wants to see patterns. We're so driven to see patterns, we'll add them when they're not there. You're so driven for an answer, cognitive closure. We're seeking cognitive closure. Your brain will add cognitive closure even when it's not there. So somebody asks you a question about something you don't know, and you're like, your brain really hates that state of not knowing something, so you're going to add something in there even if it's wrong. It prefers wrong answers to no answer at all. Does that make sense? They're preying on that.
I agree with you. I've done that before, but anymore I just tell them I don't care. I don't.
Fair.
Like it's not to me. It's not important.
Fair.
It's not important. So, I mean, if you want to engage them in a conversation, it's a debate.
Or discussion, yeah.
Yeah, it becomes a debate rather than a discussion.
Can be.
Right?
It can be. Sure.
Yeah, who's going to win? Right?
It's my worldview can beat up your worldview type of stuff. Yeah. So this is kind of giving us a little bit of an idea about how to approach these. Kind of giving us a little bit of a primer about not being so mystified by this whole process. You follow me? We have a familiarity with motivated agents. They're preying on that aspect of our brain as well. So if I go home and I see a sandwich on my counter and it's got peanut butter and jelly and it's made of wheat bread, I know that every time that's experienced in my past, a motivated agent has made a sandwich and put it on my counter. It didn't just happen spontaneously, right? We have a preference for motivated agents. So preference for motivated agents. When you've been jolted, somebody's going to offer these things up to you and you're going to go, yeah, a motivated agent must have created the universe. A motivated agent must have put the, quote, information in the DNA or whatever else the case may be. So, when they use these motivated agents and this law of primacy, we have a familiarity with cultural icons, okay? All of our ancestors believed in Jesus and in God and Jehovah, and you name any one of the Eastern religion gods. We have a familiarity with cultural icons, so it's very easy to superimpose one of those into that conversation. It's a ready-made excuse to jam in there. So another reason that these conversations come up, another way that we think about these conversations is when we have these discussions and these questions where you're kind of put back on your heels, we are very primally motivated for social affirmation. Okay, so if you get something wrong and the whole group puts their arm around you and say, oh, well, don't worry about it, you're going to be okay, that's a very calming sensation, releases endorphins in the body, morphine. We do the same thing with ideas. When an idea comes out that you get something wrong and the group says, hey, don't worry about it, you're one of us now. Oh, you didn't know where we go before we die, after we die, you didn't know it was the Christian version of heaven or what else the case may be. Okay, now you're one of us. You're being socially affirmed when you didn't know something. So they're preying on these psychological impulses that we have, and they know that coming in. So how do these things manifest in the conversations we're going to have? Okay, we're going to do this in two parts. I've got 2 pages of arguments. I've got my Matlock page, and I've got my Johnny Cochran page. Okay, everybody's favorite litigators. In the first page, we're going to go through a little slower and much more methodically. And we're going to go through each one of these, about some of the ways they fail, some ideas about some ideas you guys have had about ways you've encountered these arguments failing in the past, some responses you've come up with, and then, because I don't want to spoon feed you everything, because there are a lot of really good sources for the different responses and the failures these things have had. The second page, we're going to just kind of speed up the pace a little bit and go through, once we've gotten the pattern down and the response template, which I've got for you guys, once we've got that, we're going to try it out on the second page, kind of as learning as we go. Training wheels in the first step, and then figuring out ourselves in the second step. So the way these arguments are categorized or classified, and the first 5 of these, depending on how you consider them, are what's known as classical arguments for the existence of any supernatural entity, right? So the first 5 are cosmological, which is the one we're going to go through in depth, okay? There's different versions of that, but the most frequent iteration of it is going to be the Kalam cosmological argument, okay? Truth, I call it an absolute truth argument or an objective truth argument. Argument for morality, or how do you get your morality, what's your basis for morality, what's your framework, moral standards. There's different versions of a moral argument. Ontological arguments. There's several different subcategories of ontological arguments. I'm going to get into those specifically. You don't need to know what these arguments are. You don't need to know exactly everything there is to know about modal logic or ontology to engage in these. You just have to recognize some of the classic errors that run through almost all of these different lines of reasoning. Okay, so that's the first page. I just want to point out that he's got his little lowercase letter T on his lapel there, and he's got his African tie with his gloves. This is just a fantastic image. Everybody knows about the case, you know. So the second page, we're going to pick up the pace a little bit towards the end. And there are design arguments, which can be considered the argument from contingency, which is another classical argument. There's different kinds of that: intelligent design, teleological, the anthropic principle, and then an argument from complexity. Those are all different kinds of design arguments, okay? And then everybody's heard personal experience arguments, atheist atrocities. You know, Pol Pot killed X number of people, Stalin killed X number of people. Those are atheist atrocity classical or categorized arguments, okay? Pascal's wager, famous. We can do that all day long if we want. Scriptural arguments, and then there's some that don't really fit into the categories of the classical arguments or some of the more typical ones you're going to run into. These are some of the arguments you're going to run into from some of the professionals you may see online. One of my favorites is Transcendental Argument for the Existence of God, or TAG, T-A-G. Comes from a guy named Matt Slick in Boise, Idaho. I find that one particularly interesting. It flirts heavily with Platonic realism, which we discussed once or twice before in some of these sessions. But we're going to get through these arguments a little bit one by one here. So what do I say? How do I formulate a response? How can I expect to deal with these conversations when they come at me and I'm not really sure which one I'm dealing with? The goal is to figure out which one you're dealing with. Remember, argument identification can be the trickiest part of this, okay? So as a good starting point, I would advise to just kind of get some rules of thumb out there in the first place. You want to arm yourself with knowledge, okay? Which is what we're doing right now. We're learning, we're exploring, we're figuring out these things. We're kind of symbiotically bouncing ideas off of each other once we get into this a little bit more about different arguments that have been had and the best ways to respond to those. But arm yourself with knowledge. And when I say knowledge, I don't mean comprehensive knowledge. You can't know everything. There's too much to know. I don't know everything. I'll never know everything. I'll hold myself out as somebody who can hold everything. I'm not advising you that you can know everything. But at the base, you must know what's wrong with the argument before you can formulate a response to it in the first place. You don't have to know everything that's wrong with the argument. Just a couple things is perfectly sufficient. So the more knowledge you have, the better, acknowledging you're never going to have complete knowledge. in a conversation, face-to-face, online, anywhere you can do it, take notes. It's perfectly in bounds. You've done nothing wrong by, especially if somebody's going to drone on and they've got 6 or 7 points and they're adding one after the other, pull your phone out. Take notes on your phone. I do it all the time. If you're in a conversation and you have a chance to write it down with a pen and paper, by all means, write it down with a pen and paper. When I did the discussion in Phil's second believers, non-believer group, I had front and back pages of notes, just covered back and forth. I didn't get to bring up many of them, but that's the way it goes. I had them ready to go so I could go through point by point and say, well, at this point you made that error, at this point you said that, I wouldn't phrase it that way, and so forth. It's perfectly in bounds to take notes. Don't be afraid of it. Ask for clarification. If somebody says something that's ambiguous or vague, don't be afraid. You've done nothing wrong. You've committed no crime by asking for clarification. That's a point of strength. That's a point of being honest and genuine in your discussion. Ask for clarification if you don't know something. Look things up. Goodness gracious, we have the wealth of human knowledge, the human experience. Everything we've ever known is right here at our fingertips. No generation before us has ever had this. So please, use it to your advantage. This is changing the world. It's changing how your brain is shaped. It's not going to go backwards. It's always going to be there. Books, the internet, it's all right there at your fingertips. Please, by all means, use it. This is another reason why I say you don't have to know everything, because you have the availability to look anything up. I think it's a very good technique. It doesn't always work, but it's not always right there at the front of your brain when you're having these conversations. But if you can paraphrase back to somebody, so if somebody comes up and gives you an argument, somebody comes up and says something to you, if you can paraphrase back what they say to them, not changing the idea, not changing the intent, not changing the content is the most important part, but rewording it so it demonstrates that you're listening, you're actively listening, you're paying attention, you care about what they have to say, you care about being accurate, okay? And you're being genuine in this conversation because you want to correctly represent what they said to you before you formulate a response. So if you paraphrase something back that somebody said to you, I think is a very good technique, because that way you're not going to be accused of straw manning. Oh, you don't understand my argument, you didn't represent my argument correctly, you don't understand this, that. Well, no, I paraphrased it back to you and you agreed that I did understand what I said to you, right? It's a really good technique. I wish I followed it more often, because sometimes in the heat of the moment I start saying things as opposed to asking questions. But if you can paraphrase back to them, you've really demonstrated yourself as an honest interlocutor. Phrase your own ideas. A lot of the tactics, a lot of the techniques they're going to use are to put words in your mouth. They're going to walk up to you and they're going to say, you believe everything came from nothing. You believe in subjective morality. You believe in X, Y, Z. Do you? Do you actually think that's the case? Don't let them put words in your mouth. Call them out on it. Be disciplined and say, well, actually, I didn't say that. I prefer to put words in my own mouth. That's my favorite catchphrase. I prefer to put words in my own mouth, thank you very much, which is a very polite way of saying, I'm not going to try and put words in your mouth, please don't put them in mine. Phrase your own ideas. I can't stress that enough, because if you let them phrase your idea, they've trapped you in a circle of rhetoric. They're going to try and beat you down. Oh, well, you believe that something came from nothing. That's absurd. We've got no experience with that. And now you're off the races. Phrase your own ideas, okay? When I prepared the slide, I wrote down agree on word usage, and I was going to change it, but I'm being honest with you. It's a great idea to agree on word usage if you can. It's not wholly realistic. You're never going to agree. You can't impose somebody else uses the same word you are, the same way you are. But you can call out occasions when I would not use the word that way. The way you're using the word, faith, truth, trust, God, religion, whatever else the case may be, the way you're using the word, sure, that line of reasoning follows from that definition. But the way I'm using the word, which is, if you can go back to a dictionary, dictionaries are not official, they're not codified. If you can go back to where it's actually written in black and white, you can say, well, it says here in black and white, I'm going to go with this because it makes more sense to me. That's the way the word's being used commonly, as opposed to just arbitrary made-up definitions on the spot, which are usually rhetorical in nature. But if you can point out, not so much agree on word usage, but point out when words are being used differently, that will help compartmentalize the argument they're making and what they're trying to say that you're making. I didn't make that argument because I'm not using the word that way. I'm making my own argument. Follow me? Point out loaded language. When you hear it, it's another part of the rhetoric that's imposed upon us when we're in these conversations. Point out loaded language. When you hear it, don't tolerate it, call them out on it, and back them up. Okay? A little more guidance. We talked initially about fallacies. We talked initially about errors in reasoning. Just basic epistemology, how we know things, the study of how we know things. You cannot fix their mistake. You cannot fix their error. In the same way, you can't fix a child's mistake. And I hate to say pejoratively, it's like talking to a child. But you can't fix a child's mistake. You can create a safe environment for him so they're not going to hurt themselves, right? But you can't get inside of his brain and fix his mistake. You can ask him a question so he can figure the mistake out for themselves, but you can't figure the mistake out for him and then put it inside of his brain. So don't think that just because you can't get inside their brain and fix their mistake that you failed somehow. You have not. If you understand what the mistake is and the error was, you can continue on having the same discussion and finding out ways to expose that error to them so they figured out on their own, which is it's a little foreshadowing towards my template that I'm going to give you guys in a minute here. Avoid pointing it out directly, okay? If you can avoid naming argument from ignorance, argument of assertion, argument of populism, don't say that because you're trying to sound like a smarty pants. Nobody wants to talk to smarty pants. This is not a battle of who's a smarter person than the other person. It's not about that. It's a battle of right answers versus wrong. It's not a battle. We're on the same team trying to get the right answer versus the wrong answer. And you pointing something out is like calling someone out in public. Hey, you've got toilet paper on your shoe. Hey, you've got gum on your face. It's embarrassing to be called out, right? You don't want to point out somebody else's mistakes because now you're the bad guy. This is adversarial. It's not an adversarial exchange. This is a friendly exchange because we're on the same team, all trying to get right answers, the best answers, the most accurate, true answers, right? So avoid pointing it out directly if you can. It makes you look like a smarty pants. It makes you look like a jerk. Don't do it. Sometimes you have to because they force you in a corner and they give you 6 or 7 things at the same time. So you got to go through and go, well, each one of these is wrong, but I'm going to ask you a question about this last item. If you can formulate a question to help them see the mistake they've made, to help them see the error they've made. And I gave an example in the first session in a conversation I had with Red. A gentleman asked me about miracles, and I didn't tell him specifically the mistake he was making, but I asked him questions so he could figure it out for himself. And as he figured it out, I could watch him slowly work through the process of figuring it out for himself. He abandoned his initial idea of a miracle is something you don't know, a miracle is something you can't measure, because I just asked him, okay, so what about this? Does it apply to another situation? Well, no, it doesn't. So then it can't be what you just said. So let's try it a different way. So you ask them a question. This is the Socratic method, Socrates, right? It's better to ask a question as opposed to just pointing something out directly. This is my template. This is kind of what I use, and I hate to. This is slightly a little anticlimactic because it really does boil down to asking questions. Get Socratic, okay? First thing you want to do is listen. Be honest about your listening. Are you active listening? Are you paying attention? I'm not the best at it. I know that. Listen to the argument. Listen to the points all the way through if you can. You can stand it. Sometimes you can't. But listen to the argument all the way through. Don't formulate your response before they've finished. Don't start saying, "Hey, you're making this argument. I know what error you've made. I'm going to cut you off because it makes you dishonest." We call them out when they do it to us. Don't do it to them as well. Listen honestly all the way through what they're going to say. Okay. Know what's wrong. This is why I say build your knowledge base. Know the errors. You just have to know a couple of errors. You don't have to know them all because there's so many. It's about pattern recognition. But if you know the error, if you know the mistake, then you can point it out to them. And then my list of counters in the first session, which is right here. Counter example, outsider test, phrasing, hypocrisy, definitions, assumptions, fallacies. If you know them, pick how you want to address, I'll go back to that in just a second, but pick how you want to address that error. Because each error that's been made, there's several different avenues you can address within the context of these conversations that are applicable, that make sense, okay? So know what's wrong, pick how you want to address it, and then get Socratic. Find a way to ask them a question. This doesn't mean everything out of your mouth is going to be a question. It doesn't mean occasionally you're not going to make just blanket comments or just statements outright, right? You're occasionally going to just say, well, this isn't correct or that's not correct because of X, Y, Z or A, B, C. But if you can try to formulate your question, you're kind of driving the ship. If you watch the pundits on Fox and MSNBC and you name any of the talking heads on TV, what's the guy doing? He's leading with questions. He's the one asking questions. He's driving the ship. If you want to drive the ship, you've got to ask the questions, which is a little bit of an awkward social interchange because they walk up to us and they're asking us questions, right? You know, where do we go after we die? You know, where does all the energy come from? Blah blah blah. You've got to invert that to answering a question. Okay, you made an assumption here. Well, would that apply to a Hindu god? Would that apply to somebody else, or the case may be? You follow me? So you ask them the same question back at them if you have to. So question the question from my list of counters, and then just repeat the process. So from 4, get Socratic, ask the question, go back to 1, listen to the answer. Know what's wrong. It just takes knowledge base. You got to know a little bit of what's wrong with this stuff. I can give you really great resources, rationalwiki.org, Iron Chariots is a really good counter-apologetics wiki. There's good sources out there. Listen to the pros. Listen to Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens have these arguments. They're great at this stuff. That's where you're going to develop that kind of base knowledge. If you really want to study this stuff beyond, there's some great sources on that. Each one of these arguments you can go through and write almost a whole book on. I mean, people write books on these, and almost every chapter is one of these classical arguments. You can almost write a whole book on just one of the classical arguments themselves. So there's a lot to be known. There's a lot to refute. There's a lot to say to each one of these subjects, conversations, topics, classical arguments, or one of the more miscellaneous ones. There's just so much to know. You can't know it all. Just know a little bit in the first place, okay? So these are my counters. I can leave this up here. This was in the first session. I'm not going to give you all these. My wheelhouse is analytics versus synthetics. It's one of my favorites because everybody always messes that up. This was, if you remember from the first session, this was the definitions, descriptions, demonstrations. They're not equivalent. Demonstrations are not true. Definitions can be true by definition. I'm not going to go back through the whole exercise again. That's in the first session if you're interested. But this is my list of counters. There's not comprehensive. There's a whole lot more to it if you're interested. We can dig some into that a little more deeper in efforts. In respect to time, we're not going to spend all day long working on that. So, as promised, some of the more classic arguments you're going to deal with. One of the most popular you hear with all the time is cosmology, cosmological arguments, okay? Cosmology just deals with the origin of things, where things come from, okay? Cosmos, the origin of the cosmos, is the cosmological argument. Where did the universe come from? Where did all the energy in the universe come from? It can be phrased a different number of ways. How it sounds, you know you've got yourself a cosmological argument when you hear some of these key phrases. Begins, creation, cause. Okay, you're dealing with a cosmological argument. You're dealing with origin of something. Remember, they're trying to get you to say, I don't know, because it puts you in that cognitive state of, oh, I'm uncomfortable, I'm backed on my heels, I'm not sure what to say. Some people say, I don't give a shit. That's fair. If you just don't care, that's fine. But they're trying to set you up to make you uncomfortable because here's my law of primacy, here's my answer. Yes, please.
Well, I mean, you could say, I don't know, but I really don't care, the typical, is there a God or not a God, And I said, well, I mean, there may be a God, I don't know. I mean, but I don't think there's an old man up in heaven keeping score. I mean, there may be some force in the universe, but I mean, I don't know, and I don't think mankind knows. I mean, so you can get into these people, they're trying to pin you down.
Sure.
And you just say, we don't know. We're not smart enough to even figure it out yet. So, I mean, I'm saying that's without putting them on the defensive and saying I'm wrong either. Just kind of make it a non-issue in that respect.
Sure.
But if they want to argue it, they're going to argue it no matter what you say anyway.
Of course, and they've probably already decided before they even started the conversation in the first place. Right.
Exactly.
But part of the cat and mouse game is you just said, I don't know, we don't know, man doesn't know. Well, you're right, man doesn't know, but God does know, and here's this book that says...
Which God?
Exactly. That would go back to...
The Hindu God, is it the Muslim, all these different gods. Right?
That would go back to definitions. Exactly. What's your definition of God?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Exactly. So that's one of the counters to address. Yeah. How are you using the word? And that's one of the part of my template I'll give you in just a second or two. Yeah. So this is specifically if you're dealing with a cosmological argument. This is how to identify. Remember I said one of the hardest parts can be argument identification. I know I've got a cosmological argument when I'm dealing with begins, creation, cause, etc., right? You'll also hear random, chance, accident. You think the universe came to be by chance, came to be by accident. You think this building came to be here by chance, random, accident. They're putting words in your mouth. Remember, call them out on that. So some of the things I've heard verbatim are things don't create themselves, right? You believe something came from nothing. That's somebody putting words in your mouth, right? Well, what's interesting about that is, just as an aside, Protestant Christians, because let's get real, that's who we deal with in the United States most frequently, Protestant Christians. You believe something came from nothing. That's a chest poking, you think this, Joe, you believe something came from nothing. But in reality, they're actually making an argument against their own claim because they believe that a God, Yahweh, Jehovah, whatever you want to call them, took a nothing and made it into a something. So I actually don't believe something came from nothing. You believe something came from nothing, which I think is interesting and is a little bit of a side there. So this is the formal version of that. This comes from William Lane Craig. We talked about this in the second session a little bit. Everything which begins to exist as a cause, the universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. This is the more formalized version of it, and a little bit of the backstory. I think we touched on it briefly in the first session. The cosmological argument is just the basic, right? Everything has an explanation for its existence. The universe exists, therefore the universe has an explanation for its existence. The problem with that argument is that it immediately presents everything has an explanation for existence. Is God a thing? Yeah, God's a thing. Well, then he would need an explanation for his existence. Otherwise, the first premise doesn't apply to its own subject, right? So I can't pronounce his name. It's al-Baghazari or whatever. But in the 11th century in Iraq, Mesopotamia, this Muslim scholar figured out, wait a minute, this argument defeats itself. So he changed it. Kalam is actually an Arabic name. He changed it. His name was not Kalam. It's just the version of the argument. Kalam, in the first premise, attempts to circumnavigate this refutation because it's a devastating refutation. So this version, Kalam, is the one we encounter most frequently, which goes back to, like Artie was saying, it just defines something into existence. My thing exists by definition, right? So this is what you're going to run into. There's blood in the water here. Remember, I said we need to know what's wrong. You got to figure out what's wrong. You got to know what's wrong in the first place. Here's my little emoji shark. I think he's just the cutest little guy. So there's blood in the water here, okay? What's wrong with the cosmological argument? I don't want to spoon feed you too much. We're going to go through this slow. What do we think?
What came before God? How did God get here if he had to be?
Yeah, I mean,
how would you know?
Nothing. How far back do you go? It
That's
sets it back one step further every time.
That's the problem with infinite regress. And they say their claim is the infinite regress is stopped with their definition of a Yahweh God, whatever.
He's outside of time.
Which brings up a whole lot of problems as well.
What's your definition of God? I mean, it could be that they're saying they're trying to narrow it down to a Christian God, but I mean, they're already trying to narrow it down, and that doesn't have you don't have to agree to that at all.
I'm gonna parrot and paraphrase back. I think what you just made is a really good case that this is an argument for deism, not theism.
Yeah.
But they're trying to sell you theism,
Exactly.
right? So this is an argument for deism,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So what you'll find, almost all of these are arguments for deism until you get into specific scriptural arguments. They're almost all arguments for deism because they're just trying to convince you and sell you in the first place. Look, there is a supernatural XYZ outside of time and space, like Terry said. They're just trying to convince you first. That primes you, and then they can insert whatever they want into it on the other side.
They're trying to get you to think according to their ways, which
Exactly.
they've got a very narrow way of looking at.
I agree. Okay, so good. We've touched on a couple of these issues. There's more, and I don't want to spend all day long. I mean, I could probably give one of these sessions per each one of these arguments. I don't want to spend all day on this, but these are just some of the things that I came up with, which are a little more, a little higher level thinking about how these arguments fail specifically. So the cosmological argument fails in a myriad of ways. This is just a smattering of some of them, and there's some of my favorite to bring up. Okay, the cosmological argument conflates ex materia with ex nihilo. Okay, materia, the word material, root word for material. Okay, and nihilo is nothing. Okay, it conflates the difference between creation out of material and creation out of nothing. So here's a table. Okay. So at some point, somebody came along and, let's call him a carpenter, took nails and a saw and some wood and some lacquer and some plastic and some iron, right? And he assembled it all together to make this table, right? So we recognize this as a table, right? That's a language trick. I know what a table is. You know what a table is. Well, what makes it a table? The nature of our minds, right? We think about this. We recognize this as a table. It's only a table because we agree to call it a table. We agree to use it as a table, as a device where we can sit and eat meals and play cards and watch TV on, or hold up a projector, right? We recognize this as a table. So what they're saying is, oh yeah, look, the universe was created out of nothing, right? But they're actually advertising ex materia. They're advertising ex nihilo, but they only have ex materia to sell because everything inside the universe, everything that's ever been created before, right, has been created from material. It's been assembled from prior existing stuff, atoms, molecules, material, wood, lacquer, nails, saws, all that stuff has been put together to create something out of material, not nothing. So give us an example, give me an example of something created out of nothing the same way the universe is, right? Because that's the argument. Everything begins to exist, the universe created out of nothing. They've got a couple of scriptures, I think one is Genesis for sure. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then another book says, in the beginning was only the Word. They love that beginning cause over and over again. You hear those repeated non-stop, okay? So it conflates ex materia with ex nihilo. They're advertising ex nihilo, but they've only got material to sell. Does that resonate with everybody? Yes? Okay, so it also conflates, this is one of my favorite ones. It conflates set properties. Okay, what I mean by that, set properties, is you're talking about the set theory, big circles. This is the set of all things. This is the set of all food. This is the set of all fruit, right? These are subsets. All things, all food, all fruit. It keeps getting smaller, right? Well, you can keep refining set theory down even farther, right? And you can say, okay, the set of all fruit, the set of all citrus, the set of all lemons. Now, if I make a statement about lemons and I say all lemons have seeds, right? I've made a statement about a property of that set of lemons. Okay, so the set of lemons doesn't have seeds, but lemons have seeds, right? A set is just a concept. It's a way to illustrate, it's a way to break down bigger items, bigger ideas into smaller ideas, right? So the set of all lemons is a subset of citrus, which is a subset of fruit, which is a subset of food, blah, 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 right? If you're talking about things in the universe that began, right, you're saying everything that began to exist had a cause. Everything that began to exist had a beginner. We call that beginner, Yahweh, whatever else the case may be, right? Okay, fine, but you're trying to apply set properties of things inside the set, the universe itself. Everything in the universe had a beginning out of material to the universe itself. Does that apply to the universe as well? Was the universe created the same way everything in the universe was created as well? We don't know, right? Not necessarily, so it conflates set properties, the cosmological argument does. It shifts the burden of proof. I don't know something, you know something, it's now your job to tell me. This is classic, it happens all the time. It fails the outsider test, John Loftus. You wouldn't accept the same argument for somebody else's claim, like you were saying. You wouldn't accept the same claim for Hinduism or whatever else. You're only going to accept this for your claim. That's the argument for deism as opposed to theism. Fails the outsider test. There are dependent clauses, and this one, dependent clauses, applies to almost all of these arguments, because the argument is like looking at an effect and inferring a cause, right? But that is an inductive inference, right? That's not from a little bit from session 2. That's not a deductive inference. We know that causes have, we know that causes have effects. We know that effects have causes. But if you have an effect, the universe is effect, we are an effect, we can't necessarily impose or induct or deduct a supernatural cause to our effect. We are the effect. Does that follow? So it is dependent clauses. All these arguments have dependent clauses, and they are presupposing that dependent clause to make their argument. They skip right over that fact in the first place. So a very small sampling of some of the fallacies that come along with the cosmological argument are an argument of ignorance, argument from assertion, argument of composition. That's the set theory in itself, where it conflates set properties, argument of composition, what things are composed of. Things inside the set have seeds, but the set itself does not have seeds. Things inside the universe were created the way you're talking about ex material, but the set itself of all things in the universe, not necessarily created out of material. We don't really know. I'm not qualified to talk about Lawrence Krauss and Hawking's and all that other stuff. So, what do I say? I get Socratic, okay? I know what's wrong with the argument. We just talked about 6 or 7 of them. A few I brought, a few you guys brought up. So here are the key words you're going to hear. Begins, creation, cause, random, chance, yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. So this is Frank Turek. He teaches apologetics in North Carolina. Smart guy. He's a Christian apologetic type guy. What do you mean by that? That is actually passive, not the most proper English. So I say, what do you mean by begins, creation, cause? What do you mean by beginnings? Are all beginnings equal? Are all beginnings the same? Did the universe begin the same way your dinner began? No, not necessarily. How do we know? Did a universe begin the same way a football game begins? A football game begins when somebody blows a whistle, right? We know that. The football game ends when the time runs out at the end. Did the universe begin the same way? No, you're conflating set properties. You're talking about a beginning the way we've always experienced it versus a beginning which we have no way to experience it. Tracy Harris on the Atheist Experience has a great quote. She says, do you have a nothing for me to examine? Because if you're going to tell me nothing can't create something, I would need to have a nothing to examine. It was a great moment in the show. So another question you can ask in this Get Socratic method is, how are you using creation? How are you using cause? How are you using begins? How are you using random? How are you using chance? Remember, each one of these has multiple meanings. Each one of these has a failure associated with it. So you have to decide which counter you're going to use, which subject you want to bring up, which words you want to focus on, and ask a question about that word specifically. Does that make sense? Is this helping? Yes? Brad, you asked about this specifically, so I want to make sure you're getting this. Another question, just a sampling question you can ask is there a difference between, another way to phrase that, is there a difference between material causes and causes from nothing? Is there a difference between creation? Are all things created equal? Is one version of creation the same as another version of creation? I created a plant in my backyard by putting a seed in there, but did I create the seed? No. Are all creations equal? No. So is there a difference between different kinds of creation? That's a good question to bring up. Does the same idea work for, like your point, does the same idea work for somebody else's supernatural claim? Does the same idea work for Hinduism? That's one of my favorites. Does the same idea work for a religion you don't believe in? This instantly brings back home that you're not making an argument for your case, you're making an argument for a generic deism in that sense. Does that make sense?
You can't
And this-
deism, but people positive. I mean, somebody's accused me of being a deist. I said, how's that? I said, well, they say you believe there could be a God. I said, well, yeah. I said, it could be. I'm not sure. But I said, if there is a God, he sure screwed up because the way he made this creation universe, it's really been a mess. I mean, maybe there is a God in the family. They're all drug addicts and alcoholics, and he just screwed up when he made it, I mean, things are really bad in many
The
places.
pancreas and the wishbone.
Well,
and
I'm
the,
just saying the wars and all these people and all these innocent children.
That's a problem of evil, arguing from evil.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, but I mean, if there could be a God, but maybe this is he may be a sicko,
Well, it would depend specifically on properties. What properties are you giving that God? Is that God able to?
Yeah. I mean, but what I'm saying is that, it's like, they said, well, you're a deist because you believe in God. And I said, well, it could be. I'm just not saying. But if there is a God, it's not like anybody I've seen. I think he was probably a drug addict or an alcoholic. The whole family was. I mean, if that's from God's parents. I mean,
So you're saying
parents?
you're willing to
Did he
be
have
convinced?
A family? Did he have brothers and sisters? I don't know. I mean, are they a bunch of just a druggie? I don't know.
Yeah.
You look at the world and it's really a mess when you start looking at it, right?
So there's a lot of issues. You got a design argument, you got a teleological argument, argument from ego. Yeah, a lot of different arguments there. So
I mean, if you believe in God, I'm not saying I do, but that's an argument.
Sure.
That's a deist argument. So they said you're a deist. I said, well, maybe I don't know. I'm not sure what I am.
put words in your own mouth. Don't let them put words in your own mouth.
Well, I mean,
okay?
I said I don't know. I said I don't know. I said I could be. I could not be. I'm not sure yet what I am.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you a quick story, all right? And then it's a real story because it doesn't make me look like the nicest guy in the world, all right? So it's self-deprecating, but bear with me, all right? I worked in restaurants in college, 4 years, and late 20s, early teens, young, strong guy. We had these mugs, and at the bottom of the mug there was this concave little hole in the bottom of the mug. And we put the mugs in the rack. We put the rack in the dishwasher. Washes the dishes, you bring it out. You take the mugs, you put them in a freezer because the freezer cools the mugs, keeps the beer cool, it makes a nice presentation, right? Yeah. It's part of the sales techniques, right? So what happened was, at the bottom of the mug would get water in it from the dishwasher, okay? And when you stick it in the freezer, it freezes it really fast, really, really cold freezer. Freezes it fast. Well, the water in the bottom of there would freeze up, and it would kind of sit up on the bottom of the mug like a little hockey puck. If you know anything about chemistry, I'm not going to go into it. But water, when it freezes, takes up more volume than when it's at room temperature, right? Because it has to do with the crystalline structure specifically of water and something to do with the electrons slowing down. Water expands about 10% when you freeze it. So if you take a glass with water and you put it in the freezer, the glass will crack because it's a finite volume and the volume water expands in the glass, it'll break. It doesn't happen with plastic because plastic's got a little bit of a give, but glass will break. Well, at the bottom of the mug, it had a little cutout, little hole, so it would collect water in a little puddle and it would freeze. So every morning we'd come in and there was a limitless supply of these little hockey puck sized discs of frozen water, ice, right? So young guys in the I almost said squadron, young guys in the restaurant, we were like a fraternity, really good friends. We'd pick these things up and we would just fling them around. I mean, just you have to expect this to happen, right? There'd be broken ice chunks all over the restaurant. We'd throw them against tables, throw them against walls, chairs, you name it. We were immature jerks, to be honest with you. But it was a lot of fun. Well, these things were little frozen discs. They were like Frisbees. If you throw it just right and you whip it, you can get it spinning, just like a baseball, right? You know, the forward spinning edge of the disc is going faster than the aft spinning edge, so it creates negative pressure and it turns just like a Frisbee. This is how baseball pitchers can throw curveballs, right? So we're throwing them around walls, we throw them around the beer taps, trying to work them into things, right? So of course, we're young guys. You can't just do something. You've got to try to be better than the last guy that did it, right? Everything's a competition. You can't just do something normally. You've got to try to outdo the last guy, right? So if he's risky, if he's trying to, gonna put a hole in the wall, you got to put 2 holes in the wall. Anyways, so I'm not proud of this, but so here we go. So one day, we're upping the ante, and I'm standing on one edge of the bar, and I fling this thing, and I'm over 6 feet. I got long arms. I fling this thing, and it's really good because when you throw one really well, you hear it curve, you see it curve, and when it goes by your head, you can hear it buzzing, because you're getting that really, really good buzz, really good spin on it, right? So I fling this thing around the bar. It curves around the bar taps, and this beautiful arc starts working its way into the kitchen. And the kitchen was set up in such a way where if you're in the bar, you couldn't see what's going on in the kitchen. If you're in the kitchen, you can't see what's going on in the bar, right? Well, this girl, she's my friend, nice girl, 19, Mickey, cute young girl, bubbly. She's the kind of girl who wears, wrapping paper ribbon in her hair to accessorize with glitter, makeup, fun little girl. She comes around the corner right as this thing is entering into the walkway, and I get her right in the eye. Pow. I told you, it doesn't make me look like a good person, right? I get her right in the eye, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, I'm the worst person in the world. So I go running, and it's a run, it's a ways. I go running around to get to her, right? And I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I'm terrible. I hurt this poor girl. I'm going to lose my job for sure. I may have injured this girl. I may go to jail. She may have medical bills. I really got her. I hit her and she just hit the floor. So I run around the bar and I see her laying there on the floor and she's kind of gathering herself and picking herself up. And she's holding herself in the eye. And I don't see any blood. That's a good sign. But there's not a lot of blood in the eye itself. So who knows? We're not out of the woods yet. So she's getting up and she's holding herself in the eye, and it's the worst part. I didn't see any blood, but I saw chunks of ice and like snow, like all over her head, like splattered back, right? Against the wall behind her. Ugh. So I run up to her and I wrap my arms around her and I bury her head in my chest. And I say, oh my God, Mickey, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, just apologizing profusely because I'm a terrible person, right? And I say, I'm so sorry. And I can feel her torso and her diaphragm like contracting as she's bringing in air. You've seen little kids, they hurt themselves and they start gasping for air because they're going to let it all out and scream at once. And there's that little pause right before the scream, right? So right in that little pause, I wrap my arms around her and I say, Mickey, I'm so sorry. I can feel her well up. And then right in that pause, I say, do you want me to put some ice on it? And I can feel her laugh. I can feel her go from a scream to that blood-curdling scream to a laugh. Because that's funny. I mean, I'm a jerk, but that's funny, right? Okay, so the reason I tell that story is, who thinks that's a true story? Could be a true story, okay? Now, I'm not asking you if it is a true story or not a true story, because you couldn't possibly know that, right? But
I don't know if you're a liar or not. I don't know you that well.
But I didn't ask you if it was a true story or not a true story. I said, do you think it's a true story? And the reason I do that is because to focus on this word true. What does true mean in this sense, right? Am I saying it's a true story by definition? No, that doesn't really apply, does it? Am I saying it's a true story? I'm really using truth as a synonym for reality, aren't I? Am I saying, did this story happen in reality? Is this an accurate historical record of what happened to me when I was working at a chain restaurant in college, okay? I will just tell you that story did actually happen. I am a terrible person. Mickey, if you're watching this, I apologize. Again, she's fine. I've seen her since then. She's a great person. I bring this up.
Did she say okay?
I bring this up.
But you used the word, oh my God.
I did, yes. And there's colloquialisms. And there's colloquialisms.
You were thinking, please, dear God, don't let anything happen to him.
No, I actually wasn't. It's just a colloquialism. We are victims of the people that made the language before us. So I only have their colloquialisms to use, and I do.
You were hoping.
No, I wasn't actually. No, I wasn't trying to invoke any sort of supernatural intervention to save her eye from being ruptured or not. That wasn't my intention. But I mean, if somebody sneezes and I say bless you, I don't say that because I'm more careful with my words. But when somebody's more casual with counter-apologetics says bless you, I don't begrudge that person. They're just using the language that's set up for them by the culture that they're in. It's just people say Merry Christmas on the 25th of December. It's just part of our culture. It's how we associate. Sometimes they'll say Merry Christmas. I'll say Merry every day. Or they'll say Happy birthday, and I'll say Happy every day. That's another conversation for another time. But yeah, exactly. There's a lot of different ways to do it.
You do believe some of the things that society has set forth because you're saying I'm a terrible person. I was a real jerk.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Who set that standard?
Well,
you accepted that as a standard.
I'm so glad you brought that up because that's actually the next one. After this one right here, that we're going to get to that about morality specifically, arguments for morality. And thank you so much for that. That's like setting a T-ball up, and I can just hit it for you. Okay?
I just want to inject one thing.
Sure.
With me, I'm very comfortable. I asked a patient once, a 95-year-old. I'm a nurse practitioner.
Sure.
This lady, she was like 95. I said, do you believe in heaven? And she says, well, when I pass on, if I go to heaven, I'll be really happy. And if there's not a heaven, I won't know the difference. So I'm very comfortable.
That's a little bit of Pascal's wager. Yeah, you're not going to lose out if you guess right. If you guess wrong, oh well, you haven't lost anything. And there's another category there. If you have guessed right and it's not wrong, it's not right, then the case may be
He makes
different.
fun of me though because I believe in all religion.
Cool, outstanding. Even the ones that contradict the other ones.
All religion.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll bring that up in just a
Well, I said,
second.
you don't know what religion you are because you've been Mormon, Jewish, and you've been Catholic. I said, I don't know which one you are.
I believe
Okay, so specifically with
accepting any
what I was talking about
religion.
earlier about truth, how the word is being used, truth as a synonym for reality. The way it sounds, you're dealing with the truth argument. When you hear, do you believe in absolute truth? Your truth is subjective. Is truth subjective? They are talking about reality when they say the word truth, just like I was when I gave my story about Mickey. I'm using truth as a synonym for reality, okay? This is how you're dealing with the truth argument. How truth fails, like I just went over, it's equivocation of truth and reality. It's a conflation. It is a mashup where they are not equal. It's a false equivalence, okay? One of my favorite slangs, and if you've ever seen me discuss online, I'm outing myself now because I say this all the time. Reality is not relative. It's almost my catchphrase at this point. Reality is not relative. Your perception of reality is relative. We all have our own perception of reality. This has to do with, the time-space continuum, and it takes a certain amount of time for light to travel from one source to my eyes. It takes longer to get to yours because you're farther away. Light travels faster than sound, blah, blah, blah. Your perception of reality is not equal to reality. It's just the only way you have to deal with reality, to interact with reality. This is where you get into hard solipsism and the problem of induction and external world skepticism, Your perception of reality is not equal to reality. It's not relative. So this is some of the ways that truth fails. Does anybody else have, before I go on, how else does truth fail? An argument from objective truth, from absolute truth. Anybody?
How does truth fail?
How does an argument from truth fail? Why does an argument from truth not resonate?
Sometimes people will actually, what we perceive as a lie, that person maybe really does believe it because they're not able to deal with reality.
I think what's important is the difference between a lie and a mistake. Because a lie, you have to know what the truth is. You have to know what accuracy, you have to know what the right information is, because a lie, by definition, as far as I understand it, is intentional deception. I have to know that I am deceiving you before I can actually be telling you a lie. Because if I just tell you something and it's not accurate, I haven't technically lied to you. I've misinformed you. Maybe I'm misinformed and I'm just relaying that misinformation. But it's not a lie unless intentional deception has taken place. I think that might be the difference there. So, what can we say? How can we get Socratic? What do you mean by absolute? Is there a difference between absolute truth, objective truth, universal truth? Do they all mean the same thing? Right? What do you mean by truth? What do you mean by absolute truth? And this is where I get into my analytics versus synthetics, right? I talked about this earlier. I talked about definitions, descriptions, demonstrations. What do you mean by truth? Is there only one kind of truth? Can things only be true the same way? Like my story about Mickey and a story about where we're at right now? Is it true that we are listening to this conversation? Is it true that the story happened? Are things true the same way? Are there different kinds of truth? These are questions you can ask that get the ball back in your court where you're in control of the conversation. Does that make sense? How are you using that term? Is there a difference between objective, universal, blah, blah, blah? This is my Get Socratic method. These are my advice about different forms of questions you can ask, okay? An argument from morality. Thank you for bringing that up. This is how it sounds. When you're dealing with an argument from morality, we're going to start picking up the pace a little bit. We went through cosmological real slow. We're going to start picking up the pace just a little bit here. So how an argument from morality sounds. Do you believe in absolute morality? Your morality is subjective. They're putting words in your mouth. They're putting ideas in your head. Do you lock your doors at night? This is famous Ravi Zacharias stuff. Somebody says, oh, well, morality is subjective, right? And Ravi Zacharias says, do you lock your doors at night? Well, yeah, of course I lock my doors at night. Well, then I guess you believe in objective morality because you don't want to subject yourself to the criminal or the axe murderer's morality because he thinks it's right to come in and kill you. That's Ravi Zacharias. That's a conflation of terms. I'm going to deal with that in just a second. Is blank objectively wrong? Is stealing objectively wrong? Is adultery objectively wrong? Is murder objectively wrong? Jeff, is murder objectively wrong?
No.
No, it is not. So give
By
me...
definition, yes.
By definition, it is.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Okay, so if murder is objectively wrong, and I can find one occasion where it is not wrong to murder, right? It's no longer objective, is it? It's now subjective, even if it's only one time. I only need one time. So my favorite one to give this, and I gave it on the street a few times last year, and people's eyes just glaze over because it's so awesome. And you can take this from me, okay? This is my gift to you. Talking about objective murder, objective morality. Somebody says, how about you? Would you say murder is objectively wrong? You talk about a standard of morality. Would you agree? Jeff says
I
morality.
don't think murder's wrong.
You don't think murder is wrong? Would you think murder is wrong?
Are you asking me?
I am asking you.
Under
Yes.
certain conditions.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody's attacking your children or whatever, what was it we saw?
Self-defense. Self-defense,
Well,
right?
but people
But
get
that's
mad for
manslaughter,
killing
right?
people.
That's not murder.
But I.
People get
okay.
killed. Men's for killing people.
But is killing murder? Are they equal?
Well, I don't know.
Why do we have different terms?
Could be.
Why do we have different terms for killing, murder, and manslaughter? Are they
I'm
different?
talking about like in war and stuff like that. People get killed all the
Somebody gets
time.
killed.
We give
If
them
somebody
that.
gets killed, right?
If somebody gets killed, it could be murder or manslaughter
Right. So what is the difference? Why do we have different terms?
because of the legal system.
The legal system, you're right, but the legal system comes from us. We designed the legal system ourselves. So there is a difference between murder and killing. I kill a chicken for my dinner as long as I don't torture it, right? I've killed it, but I haven't murdered it. What's the difference? Why didn't I murder the chicken? Peter Singer might disagree. Yeah, Peter would disagree.
People can kill in war and kill and not be
Murdering.
But then some people can enjoy it, like killing, and that
Sure.
becomes a different deal. So
Sure.
You got all of these, their possibilities.
Yeah,
there.
sadism. Yeah, okay, maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
Right.
look at World War II though, the Germans killed all the Jews. And
Was that murder or was it killing? What's the
Murder,
difference?
as far as
It
I'm
was murder.
concerned.
So it goes to motive, right? It goes to intent, right? So like Jeff was saying earlier, it speaks to the definition specifically of murder. So
But
here's
they
my
didn't
question.
think- they didn't
So
think it was murder. They were taught that it was honorable. That
Sure.
the Nazis were taught that was the way to do it.
sure, that's objective morality.
So are
That's
they
sure.
murderers or what? I mean, are they?
And that's
guilty?
what we're driving at here, and that's why I want to bring this point up because I love this is what I'm going to give you guys, right? When you have this discussion about objective morality, bring murder up because murder is my favorite one. Because if somebody says yes, murder is objectively wrong because by definition murder is wrong, wrongful killing. That's the separation between killing and murder. I say, what if you're a crow?
You're what?
A crow. CROW. What if you're a crow? Is murder wrong if you're a crow? Terry gets it.
I don't think they have
You mean a
a
crow?
Well, you don't get it
Crow
yet.
again, or
Let me ask you
crow,
this.
bird?
Hold on.
What?
A crow or bird? Crow or bird. Is it wrong for a crow to
They
murder?
don't have
No.
the intelligence.
It's
to-
not wrong for a crow to murder.
They live in murder.
They live in murders. Is it wrong for a lion to pride?
It's called survival.
Is it wrong for is it wrong for a fish to school? A school of fish is equal to a murder of crows. You follow me? It depends on how you use the word. That's why if I can find one occasion where murder is okay, murder is acceptable, murder is not objectively wrong. It's only wrong by definition, right? This is how morality sounds. That's how morality
But we're
fails,
not
okay?
ants. We're not ants.
We're not crows either.
I agree with you,
No,
but
what I'm
but it's the
saying-
concept of murder itself,
But when,
okay?
when we are intelligent
Sure.
and intelligent enough to figure it out, that we should never harm someone else.
Unnecessarily, right? For the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
Self-defense, it's okay.
Right.
That's the difference between killing and murder. And that's why I bring up why we have a different word for killing, murder, and manslaughter. But that's my point is, and Terry got it beautifully, the point is that it's all in how you use the word, right? Because it's not wrong for a crow to hang out with his friends. That's a murder of crows, right? So it's only wrong because we agree on the convention of using the word murder in the context of human beings killing each other for the wrong reasons. That makes it murder. Does that follow me? It's only wrong because of our convention. Our convention is related to our language, our minds, our culture. It is subjective because of us. You follow me? You like that?
But I also believe in a soul.
Fair enough. Okay, so we're going to move on just a little bit. We can get into that a little more if you want. So how morality arguments fail beyond just that, okay? Subjective minds can develop objective frameworks. I brought up murder, right? We have subjective minds. We could have named murder ketchup. We could have named it Hyundai. We could have named it anything we wanted. We just call it murder because we agree that's the convention. Just like tables, Platonic realism, that's the convention. We want to call murder wrongful killing, so we call it murder. That's the word we used, okay? We can develop objective frameworks. And the analogy I bring up for this is basketball. What is the objective value of a shot in basketball from the half-court mark? It's worth 3 points. It's worth 3 points, right? That's an objective value because we know the rules of basketball. If you're staying on the half-court marker and you should make a shot, you get 3 points, right? Okay, so do we know where the 3-point line is? It depends on the sport. It depends on the level, right? Because in high school, it's like 17 feet. In college, it's like 19 feet. In the pros, it's like 21 feet. Don't quote me on those numbers. It's something else, but who cares, right? You follow me? It's subjective based upon the level of basketball that's being played, whether it's pro, high school basketball, college basketball. You follow me? It's subjective, but we can still speak about it objectively. We can talk about a three-pointer in basketball objectively because it's fired from beyond the three-point line, but the three-point line can move back and forth. So, subjective minds can develop objective frameworks about morality. We can call murder wrong. We can call killing not justified, manslaughter, accidental, homicide, different words for the same ideas. Subjective minds can make up objective frameworks. This is where we get into objective morality versus subjective morality. It is objective and subjective at the same time. That sounds contradictory, but it's not, okay? It's exactly. It changes historically. Like, is it wrong to steal someone's identity? How could you steal someone's credit card information when there weren't credit cards? So morality evolves with the society it's in, right? And it's dependent upon our subjective minds to assign value to actions, certain actions. Does that make sense? So this, you believe in subjective morality. Not necessarily. We can talk about it perfectly coherently, being objective and subjective at the same time. Again, like I said, we're going to speed up a little bit. This fails the outsider test. We are social animals, right? If I see a child lying in the street screaming, crying, I know he's in pain, it's to my benefit to go over and help him out and take care of him, because the babies that are taken care of grow up to have more babies, and then they take care of those babies. We are social animals. Morality naturally natural selection selects morality. If you're not being moral, if you're stealing from the tribe's going to kick you out, right? So people that steal are going to be ostracized from the tribe. So they're not the ones that are going to find mates and offspring. That immoral behavior is not going to propagate. Does that make sense? Morality naturally naturally selects. Excuse me. Mirror neurons. If I pick up Phil right now and I punch him in the nose, everybody in this room will flinch. You're going to go, oh, right? But you know that I'm 10 feet away from you. I'm not going to hit you in the nose. I'm not going to hit Phil in the nose either, but it illustrates a point. You have in your head mirror neurons, okay? When you see something bad happen to someone else, a really bad car accident, me punch Phil in the nose, you go like this, you wince, because you know what it's like to get punched in the nose. Why? Because you have the golden rule, right? You know what it feels like to get hurt. You don't want to get hurt. You don't want to propagate pain in other people because you're moral people. You don't throw ice cubes at waitresses like I do. You have mirror neurons in your brain. This is why when you're watching things on TV, you flinch even though you know you're nowhere near the event, okay? This is only to remind me about two kids, to bring up this example, to bring up this analogy. You have two kids. You take them to a restaurant, and one kid is screaming bloody murder, making a noise, throwing dishes, throwing plates on the floor, making a ruckus, right? The other kid is sitting there calmly behaving, eating his food properly, right? You can scold the child that's doing it the wrong way, and he can stop. You can punish him. You can threaten him. You can take privileges away from him. Now that child may complain. That may comply. That child may fall in line, right? They're both getting the desired behavior, right? The child that's not screaming, the child that's not screaming because you threaten them. They're both giving the desired behavior. Which one's more moral?
The one that you don't have to. Well,
They're both giving you the desired behavior. But in terms of morality, the one who figured it out for himself, right? The one who says, other people don't want to be in a restaurant with kids throwing knives and plates and all this other stuff. I wouldn't want to be in a restaurant like that. So the golden rule, treat others as you wish to be treated, came from Confucius, not Jesus, right? The golden rule says that kid, and he figured out for himself in his own brain, I'm going to be a moral agent. I'm going to act appropriately. I'm not going to do these things. Because I don't want to live in a world where people act like that. I figured out for myself. They're both giving you the desired behavior, but one was coerced into it, and one figured it out for himself. So, to be fair, I would argue that the one who figured out for himself is more moral. Go ahead.
Well, I think if we get into like abortion, anti-abortion.
Oh yeah, there's so much there.
There's a lot of rules. That's what I was.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's complicated, and some people may believe it. I mean, some people believe it's all right to terminate a child, and other ones say it's terrible, it's murder. In a case you can argue either one.
Right.
So there's really no clear. There's no clear definition of it. It comes from your perspective. But that's some of the dilemmas we face in this world.
Sure, absolutely.
Where a lot of people think it's not murder. So are they bad?
Well, it would depend a lot on definitions, a lot on, like you said, perspective.
Yeah.
And that illustrates perfectly how morality can be thought of as subjective and objective at the same time.
Yeah, I mean,
it depends on the
some people
situation,
like
which makes it
the death
subjective.
Penalty, you know, I mean, what bothers me, some people believe in abortion, and that's okay, but then they don't want to execute criminals. I mean, you know, so I mean, it's real complicated, like double standards, contrary positions,
contradictions and fallacies.
Yeah, the criminals have done a lot of bad things, so why not execute them? The baby, the unborn baby, hasn't done anything, you know. I mean, it's not
Fair. There's all kinds of different.
You're not congruent in the way you see things.
There's a lot of discussion to be had there, a lot of interesting points brought up. Yeah. So specifically when it comes to counter-apologetics, when you're dealing with morality, what do I say when I'm getting Socratic, when I'm engaging with arguments from morality? I'll say, what do you mean by objective morality? What do you mean by murder? What do you mean by killing? Just like I did with you guys when I walked through this exercise. What do you mean by, how are you using that term? How are you using the term killing, murder, abortion? How are you using it? Why is it murder when it's somebody in the street but it's not a baby? Different ideas, right? How are you using that term? Is there a difference between this? Is there a difference between that? This is kind of my home base. This is my template for how I think about these ideas.
So this is morality and not necessarily religious.
Well, I may have not prefaced that the best way, and thank you for pointing that out. So many of the arguments we have, and I'm kind of going on the assumption that we're on the same page here, is so many of the arguments you engage with apologetics are about religious morality. I get my morality from religion. You can't be moral without my religion or whatever else the case may be. So it pertains to that in the same way. Does that follow you? Does that answer your question? Cool. So one of the next ones we move on to is ontological. In ontology, there shouldn't be anything to be afraid of when it comes to ontology. Ontology gets a bad rap. But ontology is just what something is. It's just the study, the metaphysical idea, accumulation of what something is. This is a chair and not a clock. This is a table and not a car, right? It's just the idea of what something is and how we're going to identify that to each other. So this is ontology, or the ontological argument. This is another argument of defining something into existence. A lot of the same rules apply. You guys are hopefully starting to see some of the patterns that are developing about how to address these subjects and how to ask questions about these kind of things. So how it sounds when you come to an ontological argument is maximal greatness. I can conceive of a maximally great being. I can conceive of a being that stops the infinite regress. I can conceive of a being of a beginning's beginning, right? Which seems redundant. I can imagine a perfect being, a necessary being. This is from Alvin Plantinga, Modological Argument for the Existence of God. This is how you're going to hear and know you're dealing with an ontological argument. We know ontological arguments deal in definitions. It's purely definition based. And again, in the first session, I keep bringing it up because it's my favorite. It's the definitions, descriptions, and demonstrations. Things don't exist by definition, they exist by demonstration, right? The whole problem, the single biggest problem with ontology is it relies on definitions. Definitions must be prescriptive and not descriptive, right? Definitions can't just be definitional, they've got to be prescriptive. They can't just describe something in the world around us or define something in the world around us so we can conceptualize it. They must have some sort of impact on the world and make things exist because I've defined it that way beyond just my ability to understand it. Did I explain that well? See a couple of cross eyes. Not so much? Okay, so definitions define things. We define things, right? Like I define this as a table because we recognize it as a table, right? That's its ontology. Ontologically, this is a table because we agree. I define it as a table, I describe a table to you, and I can demonstrate a table to you, right? Okay. Ontology simply defines something and then ends the case there. They go, I define God as a necessary being, as a maximally great being, as a perfect being, right? I've defined God that way, and they stop their case right there with the definition. They haven't described anything, they've just defined it as a necessary being, a perfect being, right? A beginning's beginning. They haven't described anything, they haven't demonstrated anything, they've just defined it. Things don't exist by definition. Definitions exist by definition. Descriptions exist because we start from definitions, it's foundational, then we must demonstrate whether or not something exists. This is analytic synthetics.
It's the common omniscient, omnipotent.
The three omnis, yeah, omnibenevolent, yeah, omnipresent. There's multiples, but yeah,
These are all on the assert what they're.
It's an argument for assertion. If I were including all the fallacies down here, which I'm trying to move a little bit, if I include all the fallacies, it'd be fallacy from assertion, fallacy from definition, over and over and over again. Things don't exist by definition. Yeah. So, and the reason I say definitions are not prescriptive because definitions are definitional. They don't make things about the world around us apart from just the neurons and the synapses in our brain of understanding and being able to communicate that concept. Okay. It assumes assertion. Here you go, Jeff. assumes that it's an assertion, existence is greater than non-existence. This is part of the definitions that are brought up when we get into these conversations. Existence is somehow greater than non-existence. Demonstrate that. If you exist, so far as I know, everything that exists is dying. You start dying from the moment you're born, right? Yeah, you grow, you get better, cells regenerate, but you start dying and then you're born. Dying is not a great position. How do you define greatness in that way, right? There's so much to pick on here. Go ahead, man.
Well, some people, like the extremists, they believe it's better to die and kill people. I mean, that is ideal for them. I mean, they don't see death as
in compliance with their scripture.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a couple scriptures in there as well.
People, but a lot of people would not believe that, as proven by what we have going on in the world today.
Sure. Okay, so there's a little more. Does anybody else have any fails about ontologicals they've run into? I don't want to move too quick here because it's going to speed up a little bit. So when I get into ontologies, when I get into ontological arguments, I'll ask them, what do you mean by greatness? What do you mean by necessary? What do you mean by beginning? Da-da-da. What do you mean by that? Is there a difference between something that exists by definition and something that exists by demonstration? Is there a difference between, how do you know? This is the shout out to Peter Bogasian, and I love everything Peter Bogasian is doing with street epistemology. Epistemology is just the study of knowledge, how we know what we claim to know. How do you know that? And you can always rely on going back to, how do you know that? How do you know ontologically? How do you know morality? How do you know that? You can always go back to that. This is ontological arguments. You can always get Socratic with any one of these. Okay, so this is my favorite guy, right? Johnny Cochran with his little lowercase t. Love this picture, right? So you've got design arguments, right? So I don't have slides for each one of these because I've talked a little longer than I wanted to, but I want to get a little involvement here. So how do you hear design arguments? How do they manifest? How do they fail? And how can we respond? Anybody? Design arguments? What do they sound like? Right? We hear intelligent design arguments.
They all assert something is the watchmakers.
William Paley's watchmaker, yeah.
They say, oh, you're walking through the garden, you find a watch.
Right.
Somebody named the watch.
Right.
And
Because of the complexity.
right, because exactly.
Like that couldn't just happen.
Intelligence must be behind it. It's so complex. I recognize it's been designed. Just like the sandwich on my counter, I recognize a motivated agent put that sandwich there. It could have happened on its own as far as everything I've experienced before. It must have intelligence behind it. It must have it's got complexity. The watchmaker argument, the ultimate 747 tornadoes don't build 747s by going through junkyards, blah, blah, blah. That's kind of the updated William Paley argument. Teleology is the fine-tuning, the God sitting there turning the dials, making a universe work exactly a certain way. That is one way to look at the universe, but you can also look at in kind of the inverse of that, kind of like a picture, an inverse picture. What's it called? A negative. And we used to get pictures and they weren't digital. You see the negative. There's a negative of that argument, which is the teleological argument, is we only exist in the kind of universe we can exist, right? I breathe 20% oxygen and 80% carbon, or 20% oxygen and 80% nitrogen, because that's what's available to me. Any species that was born before me that couldn't breathe 80% nitrogen, 20% oxygen didn't survive. So naturally, we find ourselves living in a world we could live in, right? We would be very surprised to find ourselves living in a world where I had to breathe liquid mercury, like on the moons of Jupiter. I can't breathe liquid mercury. I happen to find myself living in a universe that I can live in. Surprise, surprise, we are products of natural selection because we live in the environment that is here for us. Okay? The anthropic principle is everything is set up with intention, with design, right? So the William Paley's argument is one of my favorites, and like I said, it brings up the 747 issue. And one of the ways it fails, and the way I've found to deal with that, is to bring up that the fact watches are not made of organic bits. Okay, I brought this up once in one of Phil's discussions. If I take a watch and I smash it with a hammer and I stick it in a room and I give it food and water and I come back in a year, it's still a broken watch, right? But if I smash up an ankle and I put a person in the room with food and water, I come back in a year, the ankle's going to heal, right? Why? Because ankles are made out of organic, self-replicating bits. Human beings, Johnny Cochran, is made out of self-replicating bits. Watches are not. That's why it's a false equivalence, okay? So it fails because it's a false equivalence. That's a way I found to explain to someone, hey, look, this argument you have doesn't work because of that. Then you can ask a question, get Socratic, right? Personal experience. Everybody's had this argument. Everybody's heard this argument from family members, right? Oh, I've had a personal experience. I read a great book by Steve Hassan. He's an expert on cult mind control. And he talks about how he was in a cult, the Moonies specifically, and he was driving a van, and he broke his leg, and because they broke his leg, he had to go on a traction, he had to be in a hospital. His parents came to take care of him, and it turns out his mom prayed he would break a leg so he could be taken care of to get out of the Moonies, right? So hence he believes in his Jewish faith as a kid, because it just so happens that his mom happened to pray that he had a broken leg. How else can you explain I've had a broken leg, right? Arguing from personal experience, right? So what do you say? What does somebody say?
It's a coincidence.
It could be a coincidence, sure. It seems highly coincidental, and that's what they'll always say. Oh, but it's so coincidental. It couldn't possibly have been by random accident, chance, yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. Anybody else? What have you said about personal experience?
I believe that could happen.
Sure, of course. So tell me why.
What could happen?
His mother was praying, and that it happened.
I'm not skeptical at all that his mother was
We're not
praying.
intelligent enough to figure it out.
But the question is there supernatural causation behind her praying that caused him to have a broken leg? What examples of supernatural causation do we have to rely on to say, yep, that seems inductive. I can induct that supernatural causation is the explanation for him breaking his leg.
Well,
My own
I tend
personal.
to believe it.
Fair, and you're more than welcome to. We're dealing with about how to have these conversations amongst people that are going to bring it to you specifically. So if you have something for us on that, we'll deal with that, okay? Go ahead, Jeff.
My own personal one that I frustrate people with is when they say, oh yeah, my aunt prayed for my nephew and he lived when the doctor said he was going to die.
Right,
And I say, oh yeah, that's just like Catholic saints.
right.
And then they go, the people generally go, it's not at all like that because you can't pray to a saint. And I said, oh, but your aunt can do it? But anyway, then they move to something else.
The problem,
My own personal.
another problem with personal experiences, it doesn't take into account all the people who prayed for their kids and didn't
They
survive.
did.
Yeah.
Right, so you're going to have to account for those as well, right? There's another problem with personal experience. Is that all we want to do on personal experience? There's more, but I don't want to get bogged down too much, right?
Atrocities. What is that?
Atheist atrocities. Okay, so this is popular. It comes up a lot. You mostly hear Stalin. You'll hear Chairman Mao, right? Stalin killed 50 million. Mao killed 20.
Everybody's going to argue.
No, the other
Sure.
way. Well, they both killed about 40 or 50 million.
Give or take. It's a lot. It's a big number, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You used to hear, I hate to bring up Goodwin's Law here, Adolf Hitler. You used to hear that all the time, right? You don't hear it so much anymore because Adolf Hitler invoked Jesus in almost every conversation he had, almost every speech he gave, he invoked Jesus. He said he was doing God's work, killing Jews, because of what Martin Luther said in his books, in Mein Kampf. I've read it myself. It's right there. It's black and white. You can't really debate that. Now, arguably, Adolf Hitler practiced what's called positive Christianity, which doesn't really resemble too much of the Christianity we see day to day today, to be fair. But he genuinely believed Jesus existed, was the Son of God, died on the cross, resurrected 3 days later, ascended to heaven. He believed all that stuff. On the surface, at face value, that's what I call a Christian. Somebody who believes that stuff. Even St. Paul said, you must believe in the resurrection. Somebody tells me they believe in the resurrection of Jesus. To me, on face value, that's a Christian. I take their word for it, okay? Call me evil by saying Hitler's a Christian, but he said he was a Christian, so how can I tell the difference? How can I tell the difference? So
They tried to pervert Christianity is what he did. He used
everybody says the same thing about, they're just perverting whatever religious belief system it
He had his own
is. Sure.
Catholic.
Everybody makes it work for themselves. Everybody makes every belief
But, you
system
know,
work for
Muslim
themselves.
and Muhammad believed that the Muslims believed that Jesus existed.
The Muslims believe Jesus is a prophet, technically. They don't believe he's the Son of God, but they believe he was a prophet. Yeah, if he existed. There's historical
They believe
issues with
he
Jesus
existed.
himself. Okay, so specifically with atheist atrocities, does anybody want to take a crack? I've got a couple of really good ones. Why it fails? Anybody? Why does an atheist atrocity fail? Why does that as an argument
They're
fail?
an atheist to begin with, and what makes you think that their lack of belief caused them to do any of these things?
Bingo.
It's
2
not
points.
the name of atheism.
Bingo, 2 points. Well, atheism can be.
Stalin was raised Christian.
He was. He actually entered the seminary, but he was a self-professing atheist. They actually erected a museum to atheism in communist. I guess it was technically the Soviet Socialist Republics at the time, but he was a professed atheist. There's no doubt about it. And
Yeah.
Hoxha I hope I pronounced his name right. Hoxha in Albania was a professed atheist. Pol Pot was a professed atheist. Mao. They've got atheist monuments in China, sure. But specifically, how does the argument fail? Why does it not work? And Terry hit it on the head. Because people don't do things. People are not motivated by things they don't think. People are motivated by things they do think. I do think God told me to kill X, Y, Z, so that's why I'm killing it. People don't do things by what they're not motivated to do, right? So in the same way, you could say that Hitler was also not Stalin was not a figure skater. He wasn't a figure skater. He didn't go around killing people because he didn't figure skate. He also didn't believe in theism, so he didn't do things based upon why he did not think, right? We don't act upon what we don't think, we act upon what we do think. It's one of the main reasons why atheist atrocities fails. And then you get into the whole, okay, so let's just take for sake of argument that they were atheists and atheism is a religion. It's not, but let's say they were, right? Now you want to get into a body count. You get into a body count, it's not symmetric, not by a long shot, okay? I don't have the figures, but it's a lot, okay? Crusades, Inquisitions, yada, yada, yada. It goes on and on.
Well, let's just start with the flood and Noah and wiping out the entire world.
Yeah,
If you want to talk about body counts.
Yeah, just body counts. Depending on what the population of the world was, numerically, what it would be at the time.
That was 4,500 years ago, wasn't it?
Give or take, yeah. Just by a century or two. Okay, so what's Pascal's wager? Joe, you've been quiet. What's Pascal's wager? We mentioned it once before.
Wager?
Yeah, Pascal's wager. Blaise Pascal,
It's,
French mathematician.
It's what Denny's is currently paying right now.
Pascal's wager?
Yeah.
It's a low wager. It's okay. I'm putting you on the spot because you've been quiet, and I like that.
Yeah.
No.
You
So
have nothing to lose by believing, so why not
Exactly.
believe just in case?
Exactly. So that is based upon an assertion. In the first place, you have nothing to lose.
That's right.
Do you have nothing to lose?
No, you
No,
might
you
be
don't.
the wrong
Right.
deity.
If you're Jewish, you have your foreskin to lose, right? If you're an animist, you could lose a whole lot more. These guys have the scars all over their backs, tattoos, religious markings, sacrifices, right? There's all kinds of things to lose. You lose your time. You spend all your time focusing on something that's not factual, right? You spend a lot of money. 10%. The word tithe means 10% in and of itself, and people give a whole lot more than that on their own. So it's fallacious to say you have nothing to lose. You do have something to lose. There's a lot to lose. And here's the biggest problem with Pascal's wager. And Blaise Pascal was actually a pretty smart fellow. He convinced himself of this for different reasons. But the biggest issue with Pascal's wager, which always gets trotted out first, and I try to bring up some of the more periphery ones first, is the problem with Pascal's wager is you're making the same gamble I am with every other faith. Remember we were talking earlier about the deism versus theism? You're making the same argument, you're making the same wager with a Hindu version of an afterlife, with a Muslim version of an afterlife. You're making the same wager I am with everybody else's. And that gives you no pause, it gives you no qualms. You go, yeah, no problem, I have no problem not believing in all those other 9,999 versions of afterlife. So I don't have anything to lose by not believing those, but I've got something to not believe in this one. You're not being consistent in your ideas. Go ahead.
Well, the philosophy is that you got to believe in something. In religion, you got to believe in some kind of religion.
What does belief mean?
A belief is like that's where you come.
What you're comfortable with.
Your life or whatever, based upon some kind of.
So what you're comfortable with does what you're comfortable with establish anything about reality? If I'm comfortable thinking I've got $1 billion in the bank, does that change what I've got in the bank?
No, what I'm saying is people.
Hold on.
religion
Specifically, I want because you brought up what belief means to
It
you.
might make your day where you're fantasizing.
Sure. You can be happy. You can be happy believing you got $1 billion in the bank. It doesn't change what I have in the bank, right?
You know, years ago, working in psych, the patients that were schizophrenic, they had an odor to them. And the nurses would all say, there's an odor. It's a chemical imbalance. And the doctors weren't catching it. But we were working with them. And then as things evolved, they found out there really is a problem chemically. And, and so how do you know, like with Hitler, as far as I'm concerned, he was an absolute madman. And he
I don't think you're
was
going to find a
able
lot of
articulate
argument there.
and fool people. And Stalin, he was.
He starved a lot of his people. Yeah.
Pardon?
He starved most of his people. Most people he was responsible for, he starved. Yeah.
Right. But if they're so crazy in one way, yet they're able to articulate and convince people that they're the one that they should follow, then
Not crazy.
and then the majority of the population is very naive and wants to believe
Sure.
somebody.
Absolutely.
And
You can be charismatic. you can be charismatic and evil and crazy at the same time.
Well, but
It's,
I mean,
they're not mutually
they're not
exclusive.
insane.
Yeah.
They may be crazy, but they're not insane.
Those are technical terms, ableist language. Yeah. Okay, so I don't want to get too bogged down, but that's the biggest problem with Pascal's wager specifically is I'm making the same wager with all religions as you are making with all the others. That's kind of the standard, right? So scriptural. Everybody's got an argument from Scripture. I'm not an expert on Scripture. I wasn't raised with Scripture, so I don't know it as well as a lot of people do. It's not my area of expertise. I can look it up. Remember, look it up. I can look it up real fast and find something that contradicts what you just showed me because Bible Hub is a fantastic reference source. But everybody's got a scriptural argument, right? And they all fail because you can always interpret anything you want, any way you want. Interpretations by definition, are subjective. So all interpretations are valid, technically, even if you interpret something that's not in the text. The Bible itself specifically says all Scripture is God-breathed, right? That's Thomas. No, that's not Thomas. That's Paul in one of his letters. And then it says anyone that adds anything to this or subtracts anything from this will have all the plagues of the book brought upon it. Add nothing to this book or take nothing away. It says you can't change anything in the book, yet everybody reads the book and changes something in it all the time.
They're all the different Bibles.
They're all right. What's the Apocrypha is 5, and then the Catholics have 66. No, the Catholics have 73, and the Protestants have 66. Martin Luther and John Calvin changed all that. Everybody's got a scriptural argument. If that's your bag, by all means, study that stuff and learn as well as you can. I guarantee you're not going to know as well as everybody else.
That once you condemn another religion, you're knocked down, and you're not going to.
Did you say Buddhists?
Buddhists.
Oh yeah, there's Buddhists. That's such a huge can of worms. There's not one kind of Buddhism. There's hundreds of kinds of. I can't even begin.
Hinduism,
Yeah, there's so many different kinds. And
But you know what's interesting? I like Christians. They start judging you, and I said, Jesus said, "Judge not, lest you be judged." So I said, "You're not in a position to judge me or anybody else." I mean, you start using the Bible. Right
that's a scriptural. That is a scriptural counter-apologetic. Thank
so,
you.
I mean, it's
Yes.
like you can contradict. They're contradicting.
Exactly, and it's written. I would argue written purposefully, ambiguously, so you can draw almost anything you want out of the text.
It's a novel.
Exactly. Yeah. So okay. So that's just a quick touch and go on scriptural arguments, and then the miscellaneous arguments I've got. There's more than a few. The transcendental deals heavily with Platonism, Platonic realism. I've addressed a couple times before, like. Do numbers exist? Does 2 exist? Show me a 2. Right? That's Platonic realism. A Platonist would say 2s definitely do exist. It is a real thing that exists. I maintain, I'm not a Platonic realist, I maintain that a 2 is a concept that we use to express values of things, one thing and another thing. A 2 in and of itself is simply just a way we discuss different levels of things and different values and amounts of things. This would make it very difficult for Bill Gates to explain to you exactly how much money he makes or how much money he has in the bank by telling you he's got $1 and $1 and $1 and $1. He never stops saying he's got $1. That's why he's able to say millions of dollars, right? That's Platonic realism, that things exist independent of the material item itself, okay? The transcendental argument for the existence of God, what Matt Slick does is he uses the fundamental laws of logic, and they are the law of non-contradiction, the law of the excluded middle, and the law of identity. I'm not going to go into what those mean, but suffice it to say that, remember doing division in school, you cannot divide by 0, right? You can divide by anything but 0, but you cannot divide by 0, right? You divide by 0, and you get anything other than an error on the calculator, you have made some mistake somewhere, right? You cannot divide by 0. As fundamental and as, if you will, transcendental to arithmetic as the fact that you cannot divide by 0, the transcendental argument says that the laws of logic, excluded middle, identity, and non-contradiction, those are just as fundamental to formal logic as you cannot divide by 0 is fundamental to arithmetic. He says, as a victim of Platonic realism, he says that those laws of logic demonstrate the existence of supernatural causation, intelligence. That's what he's doing. It's another expression of Platonic realism via argumentative formalism of logic, not numbers or concepts or colors or anything like that. That's what he's doing. So some of those arguments we're going to run into, and it confuses people because they're not comfortable with logic, formal logic. They go, oh, I don't know what you're talking about, so you must be right. And he doesn't, people say, yes, therefore Yahweh exists, therefore Jehovah exists. He just gets people to go, I don't really know what you're talking about, so you're either not wrong or I don't know what to say, I'm just going to walk away. It's kind of a way to confuse people. So that's one of the arguments you're going to run into if you dig a little bit deeper into this beyond just what you're going to have at the dinner table, okay? So, quick review. some of our objectives today, would you say we got a little familiarity with classical arguments? Hopefully, yes. How about some working knowledge on how they fail? A little bit ways to dig deeper and find out more ways they fail. Don't just take my word for it, look it up, right? There's really good sources out there. I can refer you to them. And then some serviceable responses. Mine aren't the best. Find your own. Bring yours to me if you find one that are better than mine. Get some serviceable responses. We get some of those. I'm seeing head nods. That means we did okay. View big picture today. Review big picture. We did little philosophical goals. What I think they're up to. Some of the arguments we talked about. And then what to focus on specifically when you engage with these arguments. Sound good?